People like to believe that thieves only wear masks, but sometimes they carry neighborhood welcome packets instead. Patricia Collins smiled as she placed the medium-sized cardboard box on the polished entryway table inside her beautiful suburban home. The shipping label clearly displayed my name and address, yet she did not hesitate for even a second. She glanced toward the front window, convinced nobody had seen her carry the package inside, then reached for a small utility knife resting in a decorative bowl beside the door. The tape peeled away with a quiet ripping sound. For one brief moment, everything looked perfectly ordinary. Then the lid lifted, and a harmless burst of brilliant crimson washable dye shot upward, covering her hands, sleeves, and the front of her elegant cream sweater. Patricia stumbled backward in complete surprise, staring at the bright red stains spreading across the fabric while blinking through the harmless cloud of colored powder. Hidden inside the package, a tiny camera captured every expression, every movement, and every second of stunned silence before transmitting the recording exactly as intended. Hundreds of feet away, I watched the footage appear on my computer screen without saying a single word. I did not cheer. I did not laugh. I simply pressed the save button because after 8 frustrating weeks, I finally had something far more valuable than another missing package. I had the truth. The recording froze on Patricia's astonished face before the screen faded to black. 8 weeks earlier, Willow Creek Estates looked exactly like the kind of neighborhood people dreamed about finding. Tree-lined streets curved through rows of immaculate homes with freshly trimmed lawns, colorful flower beds, and white fences that looked as though they had been painted only yesterday. Children rode bicycles until sunset without their parents worrying. Neighbors waved from their driveways while walking dogs or carrying groceries inside after work. Delivery trucks moved slowly through the community every afternoon, dropping packages on spotless front porches before continuing to the next address. It was peaceful, predictable, and comfortable. That was exactly why I had chosen to buy my first home there. My name is Ryan Mitchell. I am 34 years old, and I work remotely as a software engineer. Most weekdays followed the same routine. I started work early, attended virtual meetings from my home office, exercised after lunch, and finished the day by checking the front porch for whatever package happened to arrive. Sometimes it was computer equipment. Sometimes it was household supplies. Sometimes it was nothing more exciting than coffee beans or a replacement phone charger. Online shopping had become part of everyday life, and until recently I never gave it much thought. Then one package disappeared. I assumed the delivery driver had made a mistake. Another package vanished 2 days later. Then another. Amazon confirmed successful delivery. FedEx showed a delivery photograph. UPS reported the package had been left safely at my front door. Every tracking number ended exactly the same way, yet every porch visit ended with empty concrete steps and growing frustration. Friends suggested porch pirates. Customer service offered refunds. Nobody seemed particularly concerned because every lost shipment was eventually replaced. The only person who always seemed remarkably calm about the situation was Patricia Collins, the longtime president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Whenever I mentioned another missing delivery, she smiled warmly and assured me that these things happened everywhere. She always sounded sympathetic. She always encouraged patience. Looking back, I should have realized much sooner that nobody stays that calm unless they already know exactly where every missing package has gone. Over the following several days, I tried every ordinary explanation before allowing myself to believe something unusual was happening. I contacted Amazon customer service, and every representative politely confirmed the same information. The packages had been delivered successfully. FedEx showed clear delivery photographs. United Parcel Service listed precise delivery times down to the minute. Every record ended exactly where the mystery began, with a package resting on my front porch before somehow disappearing without a trace. At first I blamed timing. Maybe someone happened to walk by before I finished work. Maybe I simply waited too long before checking outside. So I started retrieving deliveries within minutes of receiving the notification. It did not matter. The packages continued disappearing. One afternoon, I arrived outside less than 10 minutes after receiving a delivery alert. The porch was already empty. There was no damaged box, no torn packaging, and no sign that anyone had rushed away. It was as though the shipment had quietly vanished into thin air. The strange part was that nobody else on my street seemed to be experiencing the same problem. Large boxes remained outside, neighboring homes for hours without being touched. Expensive electronics sat on doorsteps while families were away at work. Holiday decorations, furniture deliveries, and sporting equipment stayed exactly where drivers left them until their owners returned home. Somehow, only my deliveries seemed to disappear. That realization bothered me more than the missing packages themselves, because random porch theft usually affects whoever happens to be unlucky. My situation no longer felt random. It felt personal. During one weekend neighborhood gathering, I casually mentioned the problem while several residents chatted near the community clubhouse. Most people responded with sympathetic smiles and stories about delayed shipments during the holidays. Patricia Collins joined the conversation carrying a folder of homeowners association documents beneath one arm. She listened patiently before giving a reassuring smile that seemed almost rehearsed. She suggested that delivery companies sometimes photograph packages before placing them somewhere safer, or that neighborhood teenagers occasionally played harmless pranks. Her explanation sounded reasonable enough that several neighbors immediately nodded in agreement. Then she looked directly at me and said perhaps I was worrying too much over a few misplaced boxes. A couple of residents laughed politely, and the conversation quickly shifted toward landscaping plans for the upcoming season. I forced a smile, but something about Patricia's response stayed with me. She had dismissed the issue so quickly that it felt less like reassurance and more like an attempt to close the discussion before anyone asked additional questions. The following Monday, I installed a high-quality video doorbell facing my front porch. I made certain the camera covered only my own property and complied with every published homeowners association guideline. Less than 24 hours later, I received an electronic notice from the homeowners association reminding residents that security devices should never create discomfort among neighbors. The message did not mention my name, yet I could not ignore the timing. When I politely asked Patricia whether someone had complained about my camera, she smiled again and said she simply wanted everyone to feel comfortable. She even thanked me for understanding before walking away. 2 days later, another package disappeared. The doorbell camera captured the delivery driver placing the box exactly where expected, but moments later the recording stopped because someone had briefly interrupted the wireless connection. It lasted less than a minute before automatically reconnecting. When playback resumed, the package was gone. Standing alone on my front porch that evening, I realized I was no longer trying to explain bad luck. Someone knew exactly when my deliveries arrived, and someone wanted to make absolutely certain I never saw what happened next. The interrupted recording changed everything because accidents do not usually happen with perfect timing. I stopped thinking like a frustrated customer and started thinking like an engineer. Every missing package became another piece of data instead of another reason to be angry. I created a spreadsheet listing every delivery date, carrier, delivery time, package size, weather conditions, and how long it took me to reach the front porch after receiving each notification. At first, the information looked completely ordinary, but after several evenings of reviewing the records, a pattern slowly began to emerge. Nearly every missing package arrived during weekday afternoons between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock. More importantly, every disappearance happened within only a few minutes after the delivery notification reached my phone. Whoever was taking the packages either watched the deliveries happen in real time or somehow knew exactly when they arrived. That realization eliminated random porch thieves from my list of possibilities. The timing was simply too precise. I decided to work from home near the front window instead of my usual office upstairs. For several afternoons, I kept one eye on my computer screen and the other on the quiet street outside. Delivery trucks came and went exactly as expected. Neighbors watered flowers, collected mail, walked dogs, and continued their normal routines. Nothing unusual happened until one Thursday afternoon when a delivery driver placed a small package beside my front door before driving away. Less than 3 minutes later, I noticed a familiar silver sport utility vehicle slowly rolling through the neighborhood. It belonged to Patricia Collins. She was not speeding or acting suspiciously. In fact, she looked perfectly relaxed, waving at a couple walking their dog before disappearing around the corner. By the time I reached my front porch less than 60 seconds later, the package had already vanished. I had not actually seen anyone remove it, but for the first time the timing felt impossible to ignore. The next morning, I visited my neighbor Frank Dawson, a retired mail carrier who had lived in Willow Creek for nearly 20 years. I asked whether delivery schedules remained fairly consistent from day to day. Frank smiled and explained that experienced drivers usually followed almost identical routes unless something unexpected delayed them. Then he casually mentioned something that immediately caught my attention. He had often noticed Patricia driving through the neighborhood shortly after delivery trucks passed because, according to her, she liked checking whether packages had been left in visible locations. Frank shrugged as though the habit seemed thoughtful rather than unusual. I thanked him and walked home with a completely different perspective. Later that afternoon, I reviewed every delivery photograph stored by Amazon, FedEx, and United Parcel Service. Most simply showed boxes resting on my front porch, but one image reflected part of the street in the narrow glass panel beside my front door. After enlarging the picture several times, I could just barely make out the outline of a silver sport utility vehicle parked across the street. The photograph was grainy and far from conclusive, yet it matched the vehicle I had seen only a day earlier. It still was not enough to accuse anyone. It was not even enough to convince another person. But it was enough to convince me that continuing to complain would accomplish nothing. If someone truly believed they could outsmart every delivery company, every neighbor, and every security camera, then I needed to stop chasing the missing packages. Instead, I needed to give that person exactly the kind of package they would never be able to resist taking. Once I stopped trying to prove my suspicions to other people, everything became surprisingly simple. I no longer cared about convincing neighbors, arguing during homeowners association meetings, or explaining why I believed the disappearances were connected. Evidence would always be stronger than opinions. If Patricia Collins was truly taking my packages, then eventually she would make the same decision one time too many. My job was simply to make certain that the next package she collected would finally answer every unanswered question. I spent the next several evenings designing a completely harmless plan that stayed well within the law while documenting exactly what happened after a package left my front porch. I ordered a small high-definition recording device designed to operate on its own battery, along with a compact location tracker and a washable security die packet commonly used for anti-theft demonstrations. Before using anything, I carefully read every instruction twice. The die was non-toxic, water-soluble, biodegradable, and designed only to leave a bright temporary stain that washed away with soap and water. My goal was never to embarrass someone with a dangerous prank. My goal was to create unmistakable evidence showing who opened a package that did not belong to them. During the weekend, I transformed an ordinary shipping box into what looked like another routine online purchase. I placed several inexpensive household items inside, so the weight felt completely natural, then secured the harmless die packet beneath the lid where it would activate only when the box was opened. The recording device rested inside a protective compartment with a clear view of anyone lifting the top flap, while the location tracker remained hidden beneath the packing material. After several practice tests inside my garage, I confirmed that everything functioned exactly as intended. The camera recorded continuously, automatically saving encrypted copies through its wireless connection whenever a signal was available. If the connection weakened, the internal memory continued recording until communication returned. That meant no brief interruption could erase the evidence. Satisfied that every detail worked properly, I resealed the box with fresh shipping tape and attached a realistic delivery label addressed to my home. The package looked no different from dozens of ordinary deliveries that had already disappeared from my porch. On Monday afternoon, I scheduled the shipment for Wednesday because historical tracking data showed that most of my missing deliveries had arrived around the middle of the week. Waiting turned out to be far more difficult than preparing. Every passing hour seemed slower than the last. I forced myself to continue working, attended meetings, answered electronic mail, and followed my normal routine even though my attention kept drifting toward the front window. The evening before the scheduled delivery, I encountered Patricia while checking my mailbox. She smiled warmly and asked whether my package problems had finally improved. I returned the smile just as politely and replied that I hoped they would be over very soon. She nodded with complete confidence, wished me a pleasant evening, and walked away without the slightest hint of concern. Watching her disappear around the corner, I realized something important. People who believe nobody can expose them eventually stop being careful. They begin trusting their own routine more than common sense. Early Wednesday. Afternoon, my phone vibrated with a shipping notification confirming that the package was only a few stops away. I quietly closed my laptop, positioned myself where I could monitor the front porch without being seen from outside, and waited for the final piece of the puzzle to arrive. The familiar delivery truck turned onto my street at exactly 2:14 in the afternoon, following almost the same route I had documented for weeks. I watched from behind the partially closed blinds as the driver carried the medium-sized cardboard box to my front porch, scanned the shipping label, placed it neatly beside the welcome mat, and returned to the truck without the slightest sign that this delivery was any different from the hundreds he had completed before it. Seconds later, my phone vibrated with the expected notification confirming successful delivery. I deliberately remained inside. Every instinct told me to step outside and retrieve the package immediately, but doing so would have ended the experiment before it truly began. Instead, I opened the secure application connected to the hidden camera and watched the live video feed from inside the box. The image remained dark beneath the closed lid, yet every sound outside came through clearly. Passing cars, singing birds, a lawn mower somewhere across the street. Then silence. Nearly 4 minutes passed before another familiar sound reached the microphone. A vehicle slowed almost to a stop directly in front of my house. Through my front window, I recognized the silver sport utility vehicle without needing to see the driver. Patricia Collins stepped out carrying the same friendly smile she wore during every neighborhood gathering. She glanced casually toward the houses on both sides of the street, waved to an elderly couple walking their dog half a block away, and strolled up my driveway with complete confidence. Nothing about her body language suggested hesitation. She did not appear nervous or hurried. She looked like someone performing an ordinary afternoon routine. She bent down, lifted the package with both hands, looked briefly at the shipping label displaying my name, and carried it back to her vehicle before driving away at a perfectly normal speed. My location tracker immediately began updating every few seconds, confirming that the package had arrived at Patricia's address less than 1,000 feet from my own front door. I continued watching the live feed while the box rested quietly inside her house. Several minutes later, the package was placed on a flat surface. The room remained silent except for the faint ticking of a decorative wall clock. Then the lid began to rise. Bright daylight filled the camera lens as Patricia opened the top flap. The harmless security die activated exactly as designed, releasing a vivid cloud of washable crimson powder across her hands and the front of her light-colored sweater. She gasped in complete surprise and instinctively stepped backward while staring at the brilliant stains spreading across the fabric. The camera captured every detail with perfect clarity, including the shipping label bearing my name and address still attached to the box she had just opened inside her own home. She looked around the room in confusion before lifting the package again, finally noticing the tiny camera secured inside the compartment beneath the lid. For several long seconds, she simply stared into the lens without speaking. At that exact moment, my computer automatically saved the encrypted recording, uploaded a secure backup to cloud storage, and archived the location history alongside the video. Weeks of uncertainty disappeared in less than 30 seconds. I finally possessed something that no explanation, excuse, or carefully rehearsed smile could erase. Patricia had unknowingly documented the truth herself, and for the first time since the packages began disappearing, I knew the next conversation would be guided entirely by facts instead of accusations. I resisted the temptation to confront Patricia that same afternoon because emotions fade while evidence lasts forever. Instead, I spent the next several hours organizing every recording, delivery confirmation, location report, and timestamp into a single chronological folder. Each file supported the next one. The delivery notification confirmed the package had arrived at my house. The hidden camera recorded Patricia carrying a box addressed to me into her own home. The location tracker documented the exact route from my front porch to her address. The final recording showed her opening a package that clearly displayed my name before the harmless washable die activated. None of those details depended on my opinion. They simply documented what had happened. By evening, I had created duplicate backups on 2 encrypted drives and a secure cloud account. If one copy somehow became unavailable, several others would remain untouched. The following morning, I received an electronic notice announcing the monthly Homeowners Association meeting scheduled for Friday evening. Under ordinary circumstances, I rarely attended because most discussions involved landscaping budgets, parking reminders, or seasonal maintenance projects. This time I marked the date immediately. I wanted every board member to see the complete sequence exactly as it occurred without interruption or exaggeration. During the next 2 days, Patricia behaved exactly as though nothing unusual had happened. I saw her greeting neighbors with the same confident smile while walking through the community clubhouse parking lot. She chatted comfortably with residents collecting mail and even complimented someone on their newly painted front door. If the harmless die had surprised her, she gave no outward indication that anything remained unresolved. That confidence only strengthened my decision to remain patient. On Friday afternoon, another package arrived at my home, this time containing ordinary office supplies that I genuinely needed. I stepped outside within moments of the delivery notification and collected it before returning indoors. As I closed the front door, I noticed Patricia driving slowly past my house. She glanced toward the empty porch for only an instant before continuing down the street. It was a brief moment, but it confirmed something I had suspected for weeks. She still expected another unattended package to be waiting there. That evening, residents gradually filled the clubhouse meeting room with folding chairs arranged in neat rows facing the board table. Conversations drifted between weekend plans, school events, and neighborhood projects while coffee brewed near the entrance. Patricia welcomed everyone with her usual polished professionalism, thanking volunteers and reviewing the printed agenda with complete composure. Looking around the room, I realized that nearly everyone present trusted her judgment without hesitation. Most had never experienced any conflict with her, and none had seen what I had recorded. When the meeting reached the section reserved for homeowner comments, I quietly stood and asked whether I could present information concerning the repeated package thefts affecting my property. Patricia offered a polite smile that barely concealed her impatience and suggested that the matter had already been discussed several times before. Several neighbors nodded, apparently expecting another short conversation with no clear conclusion. I calmly replied that this time I had brought documented evidence instead of questions. The room grew noticeably quieter as I connected my laptop to the large display at the front of the clubhouse. For the first time since the packages began disappearing, I was no longer asking anyone to believe my suspicions. I was inviting them to watch the truth unfold with their own eyes. The first image appeared on the large screen without any dramatic introduction. It showed the delivery confirmation from the shipping company with the exact date, time, and photograph of the package resting on my front porch. I quietly explained that this was where every missing delivery officially ended according to the carrier. Then I advanced to the next image showing the tracking history that matched the delivery confirmation exactly. Everything looked ordinary. Several people nodded politely, apparently expecting another discussion about misplaced shipments. Patricia folded her hands on the board table and maintained the same calm expression she had worn since the meeting began. I clicked to the next file. The video started playing. The room watched as a silver sport utility vehicle slowly stopped in front of my house. Patricia stepped out, glanced around the quiet street, walked confidently to my porch, lifted the package displaying my name and address, and carried it back to her vehicle before driving away. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from the recording itself. I allowed the silence to settle before opening the final video. The hidden camera inside the package showed the box resting inside Patricia's home. Moments later, the lid opened, revealing her face as she looked directly into the package addressed to me. The harmless washable dye activated exactly as designed, leaving bright temporary color across her hands and sweater. The shipping label remained clearly visible throughout the recording. Several residents leaned forward in their chairs. Others exchanged stunned looks without saying a word. Patricia quickly stood and insisted there had been some kind of misunderstanding. She claimed she had only intended to protect an unattended package from possible theft before returning it later. One of the board members calmly asked why she had taken a package with someone else's name into her own home without first contacting the owner. Another member asked why she had opened it instead of leaving it sealed. Patricia hesitated before saying she believed the package might have been delivered to the wrong address. I quietly enlarged the video until the shipping label filled the entire screen. My name, my street address, and my house number were all perfectly readable. The explanation immediately fell apart. I then displayed the location tracker report showing the package traveling directly from my porch to Patricia's address without any unexpected stops. Finally, I opened a folder containing delivery confirmations for every shipment that had disappeared over the previous 8 weeks. The dates, times, and delivery windows matched the pattern I had described earlier. Although only one package contained the hidden camera, every missing delivery had followed nearly the same schedule. Frank Dawson slowly raised his hand and admitted that he had often seen Patricia driving through the neighborhood immediately after delivery trucks completed their routes. Another neighbor quietly mentioned remembering Patricia encouraging residents to leave packages untouched because she claimed the neighborhood was completely safe. The comments were not angry. They were simply honest observations that suddenly carried entirely different meaning. Patricia looked around the room searching for support, but nobody interrupted or argued with the recordings displayed on the screen. The evidence spoke with complete clarity, requiring no raised voices and no accusations beyond what everyone had already witnessed themselves. For the first time since I moved into Willow Creek Estates, the discussion was no longer about whether my packages had disappeared. It was about what the community intended to do now that everyone knew exactly why they had vanished. The clubhouse remained unusually quiet after the final video ended. Nobody rushed to fill the silence because there was nothing left to debate. Every important question already had an answer supported by delivery records, timestamps, location history, and the recordings everyone had just watched together. One board member slowly removed his reading glasses and looked toward Patricia before calmly asking whether she wished to offer any additional explanation. She opened her mouth several times, but never found words that matched the evidence displayed on the screen. The confident smile that had reassured the neighborhood for years quietly disappeared, replaced by the realization that every resident had witnessed the same undeniable facts at exactly the same moment. After several long seconds, she simply lowered her eyes and returned to her seat without another comment. The board members requested a brief private discussion in the adjoining conference room, while the residents remained inside the clubhouse exchanging quiet conversations. Nobody celebrated. Nobody mocked Patricia. Instead, people spoke in subdued voices, trying to understand how someone they had trusted for so many years could have made such poor decisions. Frank Dawson walked over and gently apologized for dismissing my concerns when the packages first disappeared. Several other neighbors did the same, explaining that they had assumed the missing deliveries were nothing more than shipping mistakes. I thanked each of them because I understood why. They had believed the simplest explanation. Without evidence, I probably would have reached the same conclusion myself. About 20 minutes later, the board members returned to the meeting room. Their chairperson announced that Patricia Collins had been removed from her position as president effective immediately, while the association completed its internal review according to the community bylaws. An interim president would assume responsibility until a formal election could be held. The board also voted unanimously to recommend several practical changes designed to prevent similar incidents in the future, including optional package lockers near the clubhouse, clearer security camera guidelines, and a neighborhood notification system encouraging residents to report suspicious activity instead of making assumptions. The proposals received immediate support from nearly everyone in attendance. After the meeting concluded, I contacted the local police department using the non-emergency reporting process and provided copies of every recording along with the delivery documentation requested by the responding officer. Because the evidence had already been preserved in multiple secure locations, sharing accurate copies was straightforward. The officer thanked me for presenting organized information rather than speculation and explained that the documentation would allow the matter to be reviewed through the appropriate legal process. Walking home beneath the quiet evening sky, I noticed something different about Willow Creek Estates. The neighborhood itself had not changed. The same sidewalks, trees, porches, and familiar houses surrounded me exactly as before. What had changed was the atmosphere. Residents who passed by no longer avoided the subject of the missing packages or treated my concerns as an inconvenience. Instead, they greeted me with sincere respect, understanding that patience and careful documentation had accomplished what frustration never could. For the first time in weeks, I reached my front porch without wondering whether another delivery would disappear before I could retrieve it. The uncertainty that had followed me every afternoon was finally gone. replaced by the quiet confidence that the truth, once uncovered, had restored something far more valuable than the contents of a few missing boxes. Several weeks passed before life at Willow Creek Estates finally settled into a new rhythm. Delivery trucks continued following their familiar routes through the neighborhood each afternoon, but now packages remained exactly where they belonged until their owners carried them inside. The newly installed package lockers near the clubhouse quickly became popular with residents who wanted additional peace of mind, while updated community guidelines encouraged neighbors to communicate openly whenever something unusual occurred instead of quietly dismissing concerns. The changes were simple, practical, and surprisingly effective. One sunny Friday afternoon, I received another delivery notification while finishing a virtual meeting. When I stepped onto my front porch, a medium-sized cardboard box rested on the welcome mat exactly where the driver had left it. I picked it up, looked down the quiet street, and smiled to myself. It was not because the package contained anything particularly valuable. It was because I no longer felt the need to hurry outside in fear that it would disappear before I reached the door. That ordinary moment, something most people would never think twice about, had become a reminder that trust is strongest when it is supported by honesty rather than assumptions. Over the following months, several neighbors stopped by simply to introduce themselves properly. Conversations that once lasted only a polite wave from across the street gradually turned into genuine friendships. Frank Dawson occasionally joined me for coffee on Saturday mornings, and we laughed about how carefully we now tracked every delivery truck that entered the neighborhood, not because we expected trouble, but because the entire experience had taught us how easily small details could be overlooked until someone took the time to notice them. The Homeowners Association eventually elected new leadership focused on transparency, consistent communication, and practical solutions instead of appearances. Board meetings became shorter, friendlier, and far more productive because residents no longer hesitated to ask questions or request clarification when something seemed unusual. Looking back, I realized that the missing packages had never been the greatest loss. The real damage came from allowing confidence in a familiar face to replace simple accountability. Once the evidence revealed the truth, rebuilding trust required patience from everyone, not just those directly affected. I never enjoyed seeing another resident lose the respect of an entire community, and I took no satisfaction in watching someone face the consequences of poor decisions. What mattered most was that the situation had been resolved without anger, without reckless confrontation, and without relying on accusations that could not be proven. Facts accomplished what frustration never could. Every document, every recording, every delivery confirmation, and every careful decision to remain patient led to a result that everyone could understand for themselves. Even today, whenever another package arrives on my porch, I remember those 8 frustrating weeks and the lesson they quietly left behind. Confidence without integrity eventually exposes itself, while patience supported by clear evidence has a way of speaking louder than any argument ever could. In the end, I did not win because I built a clever trap. I won because I refused to let assumptions replace proof, and once the truth finally came to light, the entire neighborhood became a stronger and more honest place than it had been before.